Welcome back to Control-Alt-Lead, the podcast from computing where we talk to IT leaders about what's moving in the market. Paul Smith is the CIO at the world's largest human rights organisation, Amnesty International. It's a pretty unique role. He's got the normal CIO challenges, but he also has to worry about how tech rollouts will affect staff in war zones, or whistleblowers, or people working under duress. Despite that, he's got a vision for technologies like AI, blockchain, and even the metaverse that you probably wouldn't expect at a non-profit. Please enjoy. So Paul, thank you so much for joining me today on Control-Alt-Lead. Let's start off with your work at Amnesty International. What does a CIO do at the world's largest non-profit?
Well, firstly, it's an honour to work at Amnesty, to be honest with you, Tom. I mean, for those that don't know, Amnesty International is a global movement of more than 10 million people in over 150 countries and territories worldwide who campaign to end abuses of human rights. So you can imagine the kind of things we may get involved in with that kind of purpose. We're a fantastically diverse organisation by any measure, and I have the privilege of leading the information and technology team at Amnesty.
Wonderful.
Covers all the traditional areas you may imagine: portfolio delivery, cybersecurity, service and operations. I have an information team, an enterprise architecture team, a business systems team. So lots of variety in the role and lots of opportunity to make a difference.
Yeah, and all those different teams coming together. I mean, you have the same responsibilities as any leader in the private sector, but surely the budgets are fairly reduced from what someone in the private sector might enjoy. How is it dealing with that? Those cost pressures.
Yeah, I think in the main, I think it depends what industry, but I think most tech leaders these days are facing financial challenges. And I think given that we're a purpose-based organisation, we're always remembering that the money is not our own. That's always front and centre. It's money that's been given to the organisation that we want to channel the maximum amount to front lines. So that always has to be front of mind. And we always need to make sure we get maximum value for every pound, dollar or euro spent. So it does present a particular set of challenges, but as my nan used to say, if you look after the pennies take care of themselves. So we do focus right in on the detail. We challenge everything. Governance is appropriate, and we make sure we're doing the right thing at the right time for the right reason. Probably all the same things that someone in any other industry would do, but on a slightly lower scale.
Have you got any systems in place to sort of judge ROI for changes that you're making?
I think the value's in the eye of the beholder, right? So I think whoever's the benefits owner of the system, I think will fundamentally tell you if it's delivering value or an ROI or not. But over and above that, we measure the traditional things where we can, which is time saved, money saved, all those sorts of things. But customer satisfaction and the traditional survey questions around what difference did it make for you? Did it do the job you expected it to do? There's no substitute for that kind of feedback.
Absolutely. So you've talked in the past about, let's call them next-gen or future technologies, things like the metaverse and blockchain, and how they can aid the non-profit sector. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I think the metaverse and blockchain are probably two areas that have gone quite quiet in the last 12 to 18 months with the rise of generative AI. And I'm starting to build up a bit of a head of steam around those two technologies in this organisation and previous organisations. And they were interesting to me for a number of reasons, because the metaverse, for those of you that don't understand the phrase, it's effectively a cyber-physical system. It's a network of interdependent systems that collect data in real time, process it, analyse it, and present it back through algorithms into your physical space. So that could be anything from your Google goggles or something else, right? And there's a radical interdependence in these types of systems, not in the systems themselves, but the environment, people, thoughts, histories, values, beliefs. There's a whole load of things that come together to make kind of a system of systems. So that was interesting to me, because I think they will underpin certain things in our society as we progress. Things like smart cities, disaster preparedness, smart resource consumption, circular economies, where resources are kept in circulation for as long as possible before becoming waste. Medical care, I mean, we've seen, doctors performing remote operations. You remember seeing those, and then people stitching pears and peaches back together. Autonomous driving, automated government services, and there are many more aspects of our life that through technology can be enabled by these cyber-physical systems. And that presents opportunities for non-profits, particularly around governance and transparency. Because if something is programmatic, then there's an opportunity to have more visibility into it. There's an opportunity to learn and adjust what those things do programmatically through values, through beliefs, through principles, through whatever you like, but you can get them to behave in a certain way. There's opportunities for engagement, for representation, and for, as I said, for institutionalized change. And I think it's important to remember that as time progresses and the world becomes increasingly technology driven, it's not going to be possible for us to avoid these sorts of systems. It's not going to be a feasible option. You'll be the recipient of these kind of services, whether you know it or not. So I think that's an interesting challenge for non-profits who are particularly interested in things like bias or profiling or indigenous communities, all these kinds of things. So there's a lot to be excited and mindful of. But there's also an opportunity, I think, through these systems for kind of the phrase was coined at the World Economic Forum I went to a couple of years ago, which was green transformation by digital transformation, which I thought was a fantastic phrase. And that was the ability to bake in things like priorities and values and processes, governance, general adversarial networks, increased transparency, better uses of resources like electricity and information and materials, all into these things, which I think is great at the moment. It becomes less of an influencing job and more of a programmatic job. And that excited me a couple of years ago to have those sorts of conversations. So I think it'll be interesting to see if we ever move our focus back into that space, once we're all a bit bored with generative AI. But there were a lot of excitement for me, certainly, around that stuff a couple of years ago. So I'm waiting to see.
Yeah. So currently, as you say, everyone's bowing at the altar of Gen AI. But were you investigating or trialing any of these systems at Amnesty, or was it more of a thought experiment at this early on?
It was not at Amnesty. I mean, back when I looked at this, there were some basic things at that time. It was when COVID was around, we certainly explored the ability to use things like the Microsoft Lens, HoloLens, for projecting engineering capability into the field to those that may not have the engineering capability, but have connectivity and have a spanner in their hand. For someone that can tweak an engine or fix something or point to something that's not working. And that allows you to maximize your resources. Take the qualified electrician and make him centrally available to 10 people in the field. That's interesting for those sorts of roles, not just in the non-profit space, but for any organization that has that type of setup. So we did do some basic experiments around that type of thing. And we've seen, you and I have seen in the commercial space, the advancements in things like Google Goggle and, the Meta devices that have all come out. Some more success in some spaces than others, but not so much in the Amnesty space just yet.
Okay. So when it comes to rolling out these modern technologies, metaverse and blockchain are some examples. Gen AI is another example. How does that rollout look like in the third sector, which of course you're working in, where budgets are lower perhaps, but responsibility can be overarching and global, and in such a crucial area as well?
Good question. I think, but before I answer that, you did mention blockchain, which is probably the other technology I didn't reference, and I think that's another one that's gone quiet. So I'll quickly answer that first too. And I think the opportunity for blockchain in the non-profit sector is around increased transparency and accountability. It can help you in fundraising and donation management. It can streamline your operations and cost saving, improve donor trust and engagement, help you to secure and manage efficient grant distribution. And it can help you leverage smart contracts. The one thing we did start to look at was the potential for what's called a DAO, a decentralized governance, decentralized autonomous organization for governance. That's particularly interesting for organizations like ours that need to operate in spaces in the world where we're not permitted, or where we need to operate in a dispersed, confederated manner. So I think it was probably worth making a point of explaining a little bit more around that sort of stuff, really. And I know a lot of commercial organizations did start to explore the use of blockchain for supply chain governance, for provenance and the life cycle of ingredients and components, for carbon accounting, and to ensure immutability of those things over time. So that was particularly important. But to answer your other question in terms of how do you roll out this sort of stuff in the non-profit sector, or any tech actually, I think firstly, with care and respect. I think, we're not in an ivory tower. We don't do to people, we do with people. So you need to remember that there are those who have other priorities in non-for-profit or maybe under particular stress or duress due to their substantive role. I mean, in my organisation, I've got people in the field, in war zones. They may not care about the latest version of Microsoft Word so much, so you need to be really mindful of that. So you need to act responsibly, you need to act in line with your ethics, and you need to be principles-based. So we maintain our enterprise architecture principles that are our guardrails in terms of what we do and how we do it. And that includes everything from being capability based in our planning. What's the thing, the building block in the organization we want to move on? Why? Not what's the tool we want to deploy, what's the measure, what's the thing. Making sure our information and data flows across the organization. So not baking in silos by default. In being user-centered at the heart, we don't want to make anyone's job any worse for anything we do. So we will talk to you, we'll listen to you, we'll listen to your fears, listen to your hopes and dreams, and hopefully co-design a solution for you, with you. We certainly want to rationalize tech and minimize any kind of tech drag across the organization, because that means we're efficient, it means we're effective, it means we're cost effective too. And we want to adopt information security principles and best practice. So there are principles-based stuff. I think, as you mentioned earlier, there's a particular focus on both delivering the benefits and sustaining the benefits over time. Because it's one of the things I think, people change, projects move on. Benefit sustainability is not something that's given the focus, in my opinion, that it deserves. Because some big tech projects can have 5+ years in terms of life cycle now. A lot can change in that time. People change, roles change, the environment changes, people in roles change. So the sustainability of what it was you're trying to do and the reason you're trying to do it for is really important, because these things get lost over time. But, certainly for me, right thing, right reason, right place, right time, right way, right cost, it's basic stuff, but making sure you do the basic stuff really well. Hope that answers the question.
Absolutely, it does. And you talked in a bit of detail there about some of the projects that you've got ongoing at the moment. I'd love to hear more about those. You and I have talked before about some of the stuff you've got going on at Amnesty, which is fascinating, and I'd love our listeners to hear the same stuff.
Absolutely. Well, you won't be surprised to hear that, for an organisation like ours that operates where we do, in the spaces we do, information and cybersecurity is always top of the list. To protect the organisation's resilience, to protect those in the field, and to protect our supporters and whistleblowers. So, things like privacy, confidentiality, integrity, availability, these are all things that are wedded in everything we do and that we don't lose focus on. You will find Amnesty on hit lists. There are certain organisations and governments in this world that for whatever reason, may not be too happy with the things we do or say and why. So we can never let our guard down when it comes to those sorts of things, because we're here for a particular reason. And so we want to make sure we can keep delivering on that purpose. So, being sustainable and being able to keep operating is important, because organisations seeking to disrupt our operations in any way can be seen as a bit of a badge of honour in some quarters. So that's important for us. We've got a whole load of work that's continual around that, and defence in depth is the key there. Data governance is still an important subject for us, not necessarily driven by large language models and the like, but by data governance, I mean structured and unstructured data. We deal with a lot of evidence, we deal with a lot of reports, a lot of multimedia information in what we do to drive the outputs that we drive. So making sure that we're on top of the information and data life cycle, how people engage with it, and in applying that information security from the previous points is something that's important to us, played into emerging technology. We've got a specific thread on digital experience management, again, to make sure we realise those benefits, but also because we're such a fantastically diverse organisation, to make sure we have equity of access and we can reduce friction no matter what your starting point is as a user in the organisation. So we're seeking to close those digital divides internally, and you'll be surprised how many there are across a global organisation, just by nature of where people are coming from, the education they may have had, the society they live in. And we see that play out even within our own organisation. We're doing some emerging tech trials, as I said, responsibly and ethically, but we are interested, like many other organisations, if technology like generative AI can make a difference for us in terms of, how we fight for human rights. And so there are a certain number of things we're looking at in that space to advance our mission that are quite exciting, but again, cautiously and ethically, because we do have particular concerns around, as I mentioned earlier, Indigenous peoples' rights, biases, the environment. These are all things that we need to align on.
Yeah, you've got, on the topic of generative AI and just AI in general, Amnesty has a huge archive, both physical and digital. Is there been any movement on using AI to sort of help make that more accessible?
It's one of the opportunities, actually, because if you can imagine, an archive that stretches back some 60 years, there's a good proportion of the world's history around human rights in that archive. We don't claim to be the authoritative source, but there's quite a lot that we capture and manage in that. And it's one thing to store that stuff. It's quite another thing to make sure it's accessible and retrievable and able to be put to use for current work and future work. Now, there is opportunities through large language models to have conversations with the information, believe it or not. Rather than say, I'm looking for this keyword, this date range, this kind of document, this sort of subject, in a very old traditional kind of search manner, we can ask a question and have the information brought to us in context for the question. An example might be, show me all the human rights atrocities in this region over the last 15 years that relate to this particular subject. That's a very different kind of search into an archive. And not only the ability to do that, but to do that in your own language as well, that's a massive shift in accessibility and retrievability of our information. So I'm excited about some possibilities there, because that means we can apply all of our great work and lessons learned and history of the past to add weight and context and credibility to our current work, and to make sure that we learn our lessons of the past and that we can present maybe patterns over time that otherwise we wouldn't have seen. So we are starting to look at some of that stuff. And again, it has to be the right thing at the right time for the right cost. So it's an exciting use case for me, because we've been around a long time. We've done a lot of really good stuff. And I want to make sure that's all applied to everything we do in the future.
Brilliant. And the last thing I wanted to talk to you about, Paul, because we're getting a bit short on time here. Amnesty International is the overarching group, but there are, entities, federated entities all over the world. So how you bring them all together effectively? What is it like working in that environment where everyone is, potentially working on different systems, has different control of their data? What is it like working in an environment of a confederated entity the size of Amnesty International?
It's a great challenge, to be honest with you, because as I mentioned earlier, we're a hugely diverse organisation by all measures: values, beliefs, language, ability, resources. I see that diversity, never mind globally, I see it within my own organisation. And yet we still work on common themes, on common projects, on common things. We need to interact with each other. We need to collaborate with each other. We need to help and support each other, train each other. And so that brings a need for some common services and platforms, even in a confederated organisation. We still do some things that are very standard as an organisation. So we focused on some tools around our global tenancy to provide equitable access to information and services for all. No matter what your starting point is, no matter what you can afford, what your resources are, we want everyone to have a base level of technology and information capability. And that brings a more inclusive global workforce around one source of the truth, and it supports synchronous and asynchronous working. So it allows me to see something that otherwise I may not have seen. It allows me to contribute and have a voice on something I otherwise may not have seen, but in an efficient way, because now we have one source of the truth. So that's really exciting. We've seen a lot of benefit around that, and we've seen a lot of uptake on that platform. But with a degree of autonomy to still allow, those parts of the organisation in certain parts of the world to work in the way that they need to work to be effective. But a very exciting initiative.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thanks so much for joining me today, Paul. And perhaps my final question is, if anyone who has been listening wants to get involved with Amnesty in whatever capacity, where should they look?
Absolutely. Look on our website, amnesty.org. There's always roles and volunteering opportunities there, but we'd love you as a supporter if nothing else.
Brilliant. All right, Paul, thanks so much for joining me today, talking all about the fascinating work that you're doing with Amnesty International's IT. Thanks for listening to this episode of Control, Alt, Lead. That wraps us up for this season, but for our next season in September, you can look forward to interviews with leaders at Carnival Cruises, APEM Group, Synergy Bank, and many, many more. Until then, you can always head over to computing.co.uk for more IT interviews, research, and analysis. Until next time.